On January, you may take your seats, of course, sorry. On January 4th, 2024, Aheli Moitra, Master of Arts in International Security and Terrorism, submitted the thesis titled The Morung Express, Nagaland, Indigeneity and Religion to the University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway, and applied to defend it for the degree of Philosophia Doctor. On January 14th, 2024, on advice from the Department of Archaeology, History, Religious Studies and Theology, the PhD Program Board at the Faculty of Humanities, Social Sciences and Education appointed the following evaluation committee. Associate Professor PhD Minna Oppas, University of Turku, Associate Professor PhD Sanjay Barbora, University of California, Santa Cruz, and Associate Professor PhD Michael T. Hannais, University of Tromsø, the Arctic University of Norway. On January 26, 2024, the assessment committee unanimously declared that they found the thesis worthy of defense for the degree of Philosophia Doctor. On advice from the committee, the Faculty of Humanities, Social Sciences and Education appointed Dr. Minna Oppas as the first opponent and Dr. Sanjay Barbora as the second opponent. Yesterday, the doctoral candidate gave a trial lecture on the assigned topic, the benefits and challenges of conducting research as an insider. The evaluation committee has found the lecture satisfactory. The doctoral candidate will now defend her thesis in a public presentation. Anyone who wants to comment on the presentation ex auditorio must contact me on email, which I've tried to written right there. But first, the candidate will now give an account of the aim and results of her research. I hereby give the floor to the doctoral candidate.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Professor Barbora, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, perfect. Then I begin. Yeah. Good afternoon, morning, and evening for everyone watching this presentation. This is a presentation of my PhD dissertation that focuses on the Morung Express, a newspaper in Nagaland State in India. The newspaper was established by human rights activists in 2005 with a strong interest in indigenous and Christian issues. It is presented as an alternative to mainstream media in India and Myanmar and elsewhere, actually. The Morung Express claims to be guided by the historical experiences of the Naga people. Nagaland, which is demarcated in a black circle here, is located on the east of India and the west of Myanmar. It is inhabited by a Christian majority in a region surrounded by secular, atheist, Hindu, Muslim, and Buddhist polities in India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, and Myanmar. The region has seen several movements and struggles for the right to self-determination and sovereignty, both during the British colonial period and after. Under the post-colonial regimes of India and Myanmar, assertions of autonomy and human rights have shaped the way in which communities and federal states have forged their relationships with these nation states. Naga people are spread across these two nation states and several federal administration units. Nagaland State was established as the 16th state of the Indian Union in 1963, from where the Morung Express is published today. The Morung Express operates from the city of Dimapur, known as the commercial capital of Nagaland. This is the logo of the newspaper with its motto, "The power of truth," as also speak truth to power. These are its headquarters in Dimapur in December 2022. This research began in 2019 at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. I was a daily news reporter at the Morung Express from 2011 to 2019. The initial research study set out to examine the articulations of indigeneity and religion through the reportage of a political process in the newspaper. However, as the COVID-19 pandemic began to spread in 2020, I took the time to turn my attention to the newspaper itself as a site of historical rumblings. The research questions that broadly guide this study were: in what ways are Naganess, indigeneity, and religion articulated in the Morung Express through select case studies in 2020? How do the knowledge workers, reporters, editors, contributors of the Morung Express reflect on the emergent themes retrospectively in 2022-23? To what extent does the Morung Express relate to established notions of indigenous media/journalism and to distinctions between religious and secular media? Don't worry about remembering these. I will return to them in conclusion. It would be useful to understand how I use the key terms in this study. I use the term Naganess to study the issues that arise when reports in the newspaper are connected to a Naga identity. What stays, what goes, through which ways, and to what effect when ideas, things, or practices described to be typical of the Nagas as a people, politics, culture, and society come up in the news. I use indigeneity similarly to study reports in the newspaper when ideas, things, and practices are related to local and global notions of belonging, as indigenous people, as tribes, or through ancestors and traditions. In what instances are comparisons drawn or connections established with near others locally, like the Ahoms, and distant selves globally, like the Sami? Religion in this dissertation is also used to explore the published content when ideas, things, and practices are connected to Christian and non-Christian notions, how they are articulated and borders drawn between them, to study issues that are claimed to be sacred, special, atemporal, universal, and seemingly unchallengeable. I used two major methods to study the Morung Express. The first was a content analysis of its published material in a systematic manner over the whole year of 2020. I classified the data into thematic units to structure the study. The second method involved taking the themes drawn from the first part of the study back to the newsroom to the editorial team of the newspaper. Semi-structured interviews produced multiple ways of thinking through the same issues. To analyze the data, I used two broad theories. The first is articulation theory, as developed by Stuart Hall and others. It helped me study the data both as expressions of the key terms of the study, but also the ways in which concepts come to be connected or disconnected and re-articulated in and through the news reports and our conversations. The second theoretical approach I applied was the notion of scales and scope. This entailed making note of when, how, and by whom were articulations connected to local concerns or presented as global, sometimes universal concerns. I also tried to make a note of when issues were presented on value scales of good versus evil, or size-scaled ultra pro max issues versus negligible concerns. How did the scope of issues change through re-articulation? What contradictions came up when articulations were made? This dissertation is divided into two parts. In the first part, the chapter on news production in Nagaland lays out the working conditions of journalists and journalism and some of the broad ways in which indigeneity and religion are generally presented on the pages of the Morung Express. In the Morung calendar chapter, I used a comparative exercise to classify the news and opinion studied throughout 2020 into calendrical themes. They helped me highlight Christian and national events, various festivals and global days observed by the United Nations and covered by the newspaper. It provided a sense of how the newspaper is located through local and global issues in time and space, but also gets organized itself as per these regularly occurring calendrical events. Similarly, the debated prohibitions is an umbrella term I use to study two state restrictions on food items, alcohol and dog meat, and the debates that sparked in the newspaper. The debates that these restrictions sparked in the newspaper. It provided a sense of the ways in which the newspaper covers claims around good versus evil, scales of religious and indigenous authority, and how the newspaper mediates by intervening on how lines are drawn between these domains. The second part of the dissertation is based on fieldwork and is connected to the first. The first chapter presents the re-articulations that the knowledge workers or journalists and editors make as they reflect on the themes formulated in the first part. The second chapter in the section explores the terrain of struggle as the newspaper's founders described their efforts of setting up this newspaper, why they chose terms like Morung, often translated as a social schooling and dormitory system, and how their own history of activism can be read together with the labor of journalists who work to collate and publish this newspaper every day. Let me address the conclusion through my research questions. The first research question examined the articulations of Naganess, indigeneity, and religion on the pages of the Morung Express in 2020. The study found these articulations were made on several scales that were nonetheless connected. At the local scale, festivals became occasions to link tribes with ancestral and timeless but significant differentiators of tradition and culture. As the base for any upscaled organizing in Nagaland, villages, clans, churches, and tribes, and organizations linked to them also articulated their concerns to monoliths, land, agriculture, and customs. Naganess is articulated through a national scale regularly in the Morung Express. Occasions that present such opportunities include Republic Days and Independence Days. When a clearly upscaled us of the Nagas as a nation related to Christ is articulated in contrast to a them in the neighboring India of Hindu, Muslim, atheists, and others. At this national scale, Nagas also relate to post-colonial movements like national self-determination elsewhere, like the Kurdish or Kashmiris. The global indigenous scale articulates Naganess to global indigeneity, or as connected to a distant indigenous peoples, as in the Americas or in Sapmi. Reported and republished stories from platforms like Cultural Survival relate issues pertaining to indigenous land, biodiversity, pandemics, self-determination, and others to the local context. The global Christian scale articulates Naganess to Christianity, locating Naga autonomy through a biblical toolbox of registers that relate to specific Christian unity here through flags and constitutions, but also as good Christians globally through missionary pursuits, for instance. The second research question addressed how knowledge workers reflected on the emergent themes retrospectively in 2022. I divided these responses up into certain contradictions they pointed towards that are, of course, related to each other. Religion and not religion. Festivals were presented as tradition, culture, but never religion. Knowledge workers recognized the boundaries between the moral prescription of religion and what fell squarely on the plate of not religion. Sometimes these boundaries were drawn to distance modern-day politics from a communist past, but also to claim over individual and collective Naga citizenry. Nagas are unique and beyond comparison through history, but also distinct and comparable through participation in some kinds of global politics. Asserting uniqueness becomes a way to ascribe something original, but also shared between Nagas as a people, society, culture, and politics, but also to note distinction from society, culture, and politics around. Indigeneity could be good and bad. The knowledge workers point to norms, discourses, and cultures that enable marginalized communities to participate in shaping their politics. These are instances of good indigeneity. On the other hand, state practices, including festivals like the Hornbill Festival, that further bordering practices commodify and exotify identity, are considered examples of bad indigeneity. The Morung Express frequently mediates lines between good and bad, sometimes dissolving and sometimes enforcing them. Those supposedly disconnected fields of ideology and capital are shown to be connected as readers and revenue become just as important drivers of content as democracy, human rights, Christianity, truth, and self-determination. The final research question asked to what extent did Morung Express relate to established notions of indigenous media and to distinctions between religious and secular media. Journalists conduct and protect their work by invoking a universal and shared journalistic paradigm of objective reportage and non-partisanship. Nonetheless, the newspaper is a product of history, local conditions, and responses to them. Its founders claim an alternative and counter-hegemonic position that is made known to readers and the public in general. Regulated by local actors, the market, and the state, an articulated media paradigm, or specifically a Morung media paradigm, helped understand the ways in which the Morung Express operates in the world. Its working disturbs strict lines of separation between what is indigenous media or secular or religious media. As indigenous media, though the newspaper espouses the rights of indigenous peoples and forefronts issues of the marginalized, it also operates from the cosmopolitan city of Dimapur. It is staffed and published by both indigenous and non-indigenous workers, also in addressing both indigenous and non-indigenous concerns, both peoples and official accounts relevant to Nagaland and elsewhere. As religious media, the newspaper provides a biblical and Christian context to its largely Christian readership. However, its journalists remain wary of overzealous projections of religiosity, taking care not to report in a voice of God. Sorry, I didn't show you that. As secular media, the Morung in the Morung Express is presented as a secular site of pedagogy. News of the other in Nagaland, or non-Naga, Hindu, Muslim, Jain, Sikh, Bihari, Bengali, are presented on its pages and in a secular mode. While some in the Morung Express lean towards Christian modes of decolonizing, others prefer the press to work in the secular space of stark separation between church, state, indigeneity, and civil society. Such varied directions from which to raise new questions seem to be critical to the process and practices of journalism at the Morung Express that is invested in democratic questions of who governs, how, and through what justifications. Thank you very much.